All right, welcome everyone. Let's dive right into this pile of BML documents you've sent our way. Seems like you're really looking to master this Oracle CPQ customization tool. And well, we're here to help you sort through it all
That's right.
and find those real golden nuggets of information.
Yeah, think of us as your shortcut to BML fluency.
Exactly. Now, BML, for those who might not be familiar, is
Mhm.
a programming language. It lets you tailor Oracle CPQ as its configure, price, quote, software to your company's specific needs.
Yeah, the real beauty of it is it helps you avoid writing the same code over and over again. It's all about efficiency, getting the most out of your CPQ system.
And that's where understanding those BML functions comes in, right?
Absolutely. You've probably seen functions before in another programming context, but BML has a unique way of using them.
Okay, so what makes BML functions so special?
Think of a BML function as a mini program within your larger CPQ setup.
Hmm.
It can be a simple rule, like linking variables, but it can also execute a series of commands based on inputs, which we call parameters in BML.
So it's like a prepackaged solution to a common task, ready to go whenever you need it.
Exactly.
I can see how that would save a ton of time
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
and effort.
And speaking of efficiency, BML handles variables in a way that might surprise you.
Oh, how so?
So in a lot of programming languages, you declare a variable first, basically saying, hey, I'm going to need a container for this type of data.
Okay.
And then you initialize it, put a value in that container.
Right.
But BML streamlines the whole thing.
Okay.
You do both declaration and initialization at the same time.
So it's like saying, hey, BML, reserve a spot for a number, and
Yeah.
we'll call it discount, and right now it's 10%.
Exactly. It's one of those subtle things that makes BML stand out.
I like it. So we've got functions as our building blocks and variables holding our data. What about the overall structure of a BML program? How does it all come together?
Well, every BML program follows a specific order,
Mm.
kind of like constructing a building.
Okay.
You start with foundational statements, you set the stage,
Right.
then you declare your variables, and finally you get to the core source code with all the instructions.
Now, and if I remember correctly from the documents, every BML program needs to have a return statement. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's like your final punctuation mark.
Yeah.
It tells BML what value to send back once it's done processing all the instructions.
So it's like saying, and scene,
Mhm. Yeah.
at the end of a movie script,
Mhm.
signaling that the action is complete.
I like that, yeah. Now, just as a movie needs different types of scenes,
Uh-huh.
action, drama, comedy, BML works with different types of data,
Great.
each with its own purpose.
Yeah, we've got integers for whole numbers, floats for those with decimals, strings for text, and booleans for those true or false scenarios.
Mm.
Pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, they are familiar data types, but how BML uses them can have some unique consequences. For instance, remember how we talked about BML functions taking in parameters?
Yeah, those inputs that determine what the function does.
Well, BML passes complex data types,
Okay.
like arrays and dictionaries,
Mhm.
by reference, not by value.
Okay, now remind me, what's the difference between passing by reference and passing by value?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Passing by value is like making a photocopy of a document.
Mm-hmm.
Someone can scribble on it all they want, but the original's still fine.
Mm.
Passing by reference is like handing over the original document.
Okay.
Any changes they make directly affect the source.
So if a BML function modifies an array that was passed by reference,
Right.
those changes go back to the original array that might be used elsewhere in the code.
Exactly. It can be super powerful, letting you manipulate data directly.
Mm-hmm.
It means you got to be really careful, avoid any unintended consequences.
It's a double-edged sword.
It is.
Powerful, but you need to handle it carefully.
That's right.
Now, I've noticed these documents emphasize adding comments to the BML code. Why is that so important?
It's all about making your code understandable, not just for you, but for anyone who might work with it in the future, maybe even your future self,
Right.
trying to figure out what you wrote months ago.
So less about explaining what the code does, more about explaining why it does it.
Exactly. Think of it like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for anyone venturing into your BML forest.
I like that. Which brings us to another way BML keeps things organized. Libraries.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Libraries are like repositories for functions,
Okay.
allowing you to store and reuse those clever bits of code you've created.
So instead of rewriting the same logic again and again, you
Right.
can just call up a function from the library.
You got it. And BML has two main types of libraries,
Hmm.
commerce and util.
All right, break those down for me. What's the difference?
Think of commerce libraries as containing functions specifically for commerce-related tasks in your CPQ.
Okay.
Util libraries hold more general-purpose functions, things you can use across a wider range of scenarios.
So choosing the right library is like selecting the right tool from your toolbox.
Exactly.
Use the specialized tool for the specialized task
Yeah.
and the more versatile one for those broader applications.
Exactly. And just like a well-organized toolbox, BML gives you ways to manage and control access to these functions, especially when you have multiple developers working on the same project.
Right. I remember seeing something about util locking. What was that all about?
Util locking lets you lock down certain functions in a util library
Hmm.
to prevent accidental modifications. It's really helpful when you're working with a team
Yeah.
and need to ensure that critical functions remain untouched.
So it's like putting a do not touch sign on a delicate piece of equipment?
Precisely. But sometimes even those protected functions need tweaking
Right.
to meet specific requirements. That's where overriding comes in.
Overriding. So you can actually bypass those locks.
You can under certain circumstances.
Mhm.
Think of it as having a master key that lets you adjust those locked functions
Okay.
without disrupting the entire system.
It's a powerful feature, but it sounds like you really need to know what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. You need a deep understanding of the function and its potential impact.
We're getting into some pretty advanced territory here.
Yeah.
And the documents also mention recursive validation. What's that all about?
Recursive validation is essentially a safety net built into BML.
Mm-hmm.
It prevents functions from calling themselves endlessly, which could lead to infinite loops and bring your whole CPQ system to a grinding halt.
Ah, so it's like making sure a recipe doesn't say,
Right.
to make this cake, first make this cake.
Exactly.
That would be a recipe for disaster.
Recursive validation makes sure your functions have a clear, logical flow, preventing those circular dependencies that can cause chaos.
Okay, so we've got functions, variables, libraries, safeguards against infinite loops. Feels like we're building a solid foundation for BML knowledge.
We are, but before we move on to the more specialized parts of BML, there's one skill every BML developer needs:
Mm-hmm.
debugging.
Ah, yes, debugging. The art of finding and fixing those inevitable errors in our code. What makes debugging in BML particularly challenging?
Well, debugging those util functions, especially when they're called from within other functions, can be tricky. The error messages don't always point you to the exact source of the problem.
So it's like trying to find a loose wire in a complex circuit, but the diagram's incomplete.
That's a great analogy. And sometimes you need to recreate the whole function call in a separate test script just to figure out what's going wrong.
A test script. So you build a mini version of the problem
Exactly.
to isolate the issue.
It's a controlled environment where you can examine the code's behavior step by step and pinpoint the source of the error.
Okay, that makes sense. But creating those test scripts, there must be some best practices for that, right?
Absolutely. First off, your test script needs clear pass-fail conditions.
Yeah.
You need to know exactly what the expected output should be, then compare it to what the function actually produces.
So it's like writing a test for a student, you give them the problem and a clear answer key.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't throw away old tests, keep your old test scripts. They can be super helpful for catching regressions, those times when a code change accidentally brings back an old bug.
Ah, so they act like a safety net,
Mhm.
preventing us from tripping over the same errors twice.
Precisely. Keep those test scripts focused and concise, too. Test one thing at a time. Makes it way easier to pinpoint problems.
Like a scientific experiment.
Yeah.
Isolate the variables, carefully observe the results.
Now, let's say we need to debug a util function. Remember that divide by zero error we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the classic math problem.
Let's say our error log points to a problem in a calculate discount action.
Mm-hmm.
We've traced it back to a call to a util function called getAverage.
Okay, so we're dealing with a function that's supposed to calculate the average of some values, but something's going wrong, causing a divide by zero error.
Right.
Where do we even start?
First, we got to examine the original function call in that calculate discount action. What parameters were being passed to getAverage when the error happened?
So we need to see what data was going into the function that might have caused it to stumble.
Exactly. This is crucial for recreating the problem in our test script. Let's say the parameter being passed to getAverage is an array of numbers.
Okay.
Now, remember how we talked about BML passing arrays by reference?
Yeah, any changes to the array within the function will affect the original array.
Precisely. So we print out the array being passed to getAverage and discover it's empty. No numbers in it.
Ah, that would explain the divide by zero error. It's trying to calculate the average of nothing, which doesn't make mathematical sense.
You got it. Now we can build our test script, create an empty array, just like the one that caused the error, pass it to getAverage, and watch what happens.
And since we're expecting a divide by zero error, we'll need to modify getAverage to handle this edge case gracefully, right?
Exactly. Maybe add a conditional statement that checks if the array is empty and then returns a default value, like 0, to avoid the error.
Okay, so we've identified the problem, built a test script, and come up with a potential solution. Debugging in action.
That's just one example of how debugging works in BML. Lots of other techniques and tools out there, but the key principles are the same. Understand the error, isolate the problem, test your solution thoroughly.
That's like detective work for code. Now, the documents also mention something called package lifecycle management. What's that all about?
Package Lifecycle Management, or PLM, is about managing the movement of custom functionality between CPQ environments. Imagine you've developed a whole bunch of BML functions for your development environment, and now you want to move them to testing and eventually to your live production environment.
So it's like packing up your BML toolbox and shipping it off to different locations.
Exactly. PLM helps you create these packages, encrypt them for security, and then deploy them to those environments. All about consistency and protecting your intellectual property.
And I bet this is where those namespaces come into play, right?
You got it. Remember how namespaces are like unique identifiers for functions, preventing naming conflicts?
Right. It's like giving each function a passport so it can travel between countries without getting lost in translation.
Precisely. When you're moving functions between environments, namespaces ensure they don't clash with existing functions that might have the same name.
Okay, so PLM keeps our BML creations safe and sound as they move around. Now, there's one more acronym I keep seeing, BMQL. What's that all about?
BMQL stands for BML Query Language. It's a powerful tool for interacting with data tables within your CPQ system. You can query and manipulate data using a syntax similar to SQL if you've ever worked with databases.
So it's like having a direct line to the CPQ data, allowing us to extract specific info, perform calculations, even modify the data directly.
That's right. BMQL gives you a lot of flexibility in how you access and use CPQ data within your BML functions.
Sounds powerful, but also like it requires a bit of finesse and caution.
Absolutely. Whenever you're working with BMQL, always double-check your syntax, test your queries thoroughly, and maybe even have a backup of your data just in case.
Always sound advice, especially when dealing with important data. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, explored the building blocks of BML functions, variables, libraries, and we touched on some key concepts: debugging, package management, data manipulation with BMQL. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but we've only scratched the surface. In the next part of our dive, we'll explore specific BML functions and how they solve real-world CPQ challenges.
Yeah, wait, I'm ready to see all these BML concepts in action.
Welcome back to our BML deep dives.
Yeah, it feels like we've already covered a ton, but I'm excited to see how these concepts we talked about actually translate into real-world solutions.
That's exactly what we're going to do. Remember how we talked about BML libraries being like toolboxes full of those pre-built functions?
Yeah, we've got those commerce libraries for those specialized tasks,
Yeah.
and the util libraries for those more general-purpose ones.
Well, now it's time to open those toolboxes up and explore some of the tools inside.
Okay,
But with hundreds of BML functions, where do we even begin?
that's a good point. We could easily get lost in a sea of functions. Should we stick to the most commonly used ones? Or maybe the ones with the most intriguing names? I don't know.
Let's think about our listener. What are they hoping to get out of this?
Yeah.
They probably want to see how BML can solve real problems in their CPQ environment, right?
Yeah, they're looking for those aha moments
Right.
where they can see how BML can make their lives easier or help them reach their goals.
Exactly. So let's focus on functions that have interesting uses or really showcase those core concepts we talked about earlier.
I like that. So what function has caught your eye?
Well, going through the documents, one that jumped out at me was add parts to transaction.
Add parts to transactions. The name kind of gives it away, doesn't it?
It does, but there's more to it than you might think. This function lets you add multiple parts to a transaction, like a quote or an order, all at once.
So instead of manually adding each part one by one, you can use this function to streamline the process, especially for complex configurations with lots of components.
Exactly. Imagine you're configuring a server system. You've got the server itself, memory, hard drives, network cards. Instead of clicking through screens and adding each part individually,
Right.
you could write a BML function that uses add parts to transaction to add all those parts automatically based on a template or some rules you set up.
That would save a ton of time and clicks. It's like having a shopping cart that automatically adds all the necessary accessories based on the main product you choose.
I like that. And add parts to transaction gives you a lot of control over how those parts get added too.
Okay.
You can specify the quantity of each part, the price book to use, even assign custom attributes.
So it's not just a simple add to cart function. It gives you a lot of flexibility and customization options.
Exactly. And as a quick reminder, this function is specifically for commerce actions in your CPQ,
Yeah,
not for general use. So always double check you're using the right tool for the job.
right. Use the right tool for the right job. Our BML motto. What other functions stand out to you?
Let's see. This one's really helpful for generating nicely formatted documents from CPQ data. Apply template.
Apply template. Sounds intriguing. Does it let you create templates for quotes, invoices, or product specs?
Exactly. Apply template lets you take a pre-designed template, which could be an HTML file, text file, even an XML document ad, and populate it with data from your BML code.
So instead of manually copying and pasting info into a template, you can use this function to automate the whole process, ensuring everything's consistent and accurate.
Precisely. Imagine a template for a sales quote.
Mm-hmm.
It's got placeholders for things like the customer's name, the product details, the pricing, and so on. You can write a BML function that uses a apply template to grab all that info from your CPQ data and insert it into the template.
And boom, perfectly formatted sales quote ready to go.
Exactly. Apply template is all about automation
Yeah,
and making sure your documents and outputs look professional and consistent.
I can see how that would be a lifesaver for companies that generate a lot of documents or need to maintain a specific brand image.
Definitely. And apply template relies on tokens, which are basically those placeholders in your template that you want to replace with actual data.
Tokens. So they're like those Mad Libs fill in the blanks,
Mm-hmm.
but for business documents.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
They're usually enclosed in double curly braces like this.
Okay.
Your BML code then provides the values for those tokens, dynamically filling in those blanks.
So in our sales quote example, we might have tokens for customer name, product price, and so
Exactly. Your BML code would then provide the values for those tokens, so the final output is customized for each specific situation.
it's like mail merge, but on steroids.
That's a good one.
Ah.
Apply template is a powerful tool for making dynamic documents from your CPQ data.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's look at a function that's essential for retrieving detailed info about a transaction. Get transaction.
Get transaction. That rings a bell. Didn't we talk about this function earlier? I thought there was a limitation with it.
We did.
Mhm.
Remember how get transaction can only access data about the current transaction being processed?
Yeah, it's like only having access to one drawer in a filing cabinet,
Right?
even if you know there's relevant information in other drawers.
That's a good way to put it. But even with that limitation, get transaction is super useful for working with that specific transaction.
So if I need to grab info about the current quote or order, get transaction is my go-to.
Exactly. It returns that data in a structured format called XML,
Okay.
which stands for Extensible Markup Language.
XML, I've seen that before. It's a way to organize data hierarchically, kind of like HTML, but with custom tags.
You got it. BML even has some helpful functions for working with XML, like read XM single and read XL multiple.
Okay, so readXM single pulls out a single piece of information, while readXL multiple grabs multiple pieces.
You're picking it up quickly. These functions let you pinpoint specific elements or attributes within that XML and extract the info you need.
So if I'm using transaction XML from getTransaction, I can use these functions to get things like the customer's name, the order date, the product details, all that.
Exactly. And those XML functions are really useful when you need to connect your CPQ system with other systems or data sources that use XML.
Speaking of connecting with other systems, I know BML can talk to the outside world. What functions should we know about for that?
One of the most versatile tools for external communication is the URL data function.
Okay.
It lets you make different types of HTTP requests, which is like the language of the internet, to interact with web services or APIs.
So if I need to get the latest exchange rates from a financial API,
Yeah.
send order info to a fulfillment system, or update a customer record in a CRM, World Data can handle it.
Exactly. It's like having a built-in messenger service for your BML code to
Right.
talk to other systems.
That's impressive, but I'm guessing working with external systems can be a bit unpredictable.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if the external system is slow or gives an error?
You're right. Things don't always go smoothly with external systems. That's why you need to build in good error handling and make your code resilient. you know, able to bounce back from those hiccups.
So it's like planning for those what-if scenarios,
Exactly.
making sure your code can handle whatever comes its way.
And when you're sending sensitive data, like credit card numbers, security is paramount.
Right.
BML has functions like URL data by post, which is specifically designed for sending data securely.
Okay, so we've got secure communication covered. Now, I remember seeing something about JSON in the documents. Where does that fit in?
JSON or JavaScript object notation is another way to structure data, commonly used by web services and APIs. While we've talked about JSON for external communication, BML also has functions for working with JSON data within your code.
So we can actually create, manipulate, and use JSON objects directly in our BML functions.
We got it. Functions like JSON, JSON array, JSON put, JSON it. You can use those to create objects, add data to them, pull information out, even convert between objects and text strings.
I can see how that would be useful for managing data that doesn't fit into those basic BML data types we talked about.
Right. Imagine you need to store info about a customer.
Yeah.
Name, address, order history, preferences.
Okay.
Using separate variables for all that would get messy fast.
Yeah, like trying to organize a jumbled mess of sticky notes.
But you could create a JSON object to represent that customer
Okay.
with organized sub-objects for their address, order history, and preferences. It's much more structured and efficient.
So it's like a digital filing cabinet for each customer with clearly labeled folders.
Exactly. The JSON functions in BML give you the tools to create and manage those digital filing cabinets effectively.
Okay, JSON functions, another powerful tool in our BML toolbox. What about functions that don't fit neatly into these categories? Are there any other functions lurking in the BML depths?
The other functions.
Yeah.
A bit of a miscellaneous category, but it's got some hidden gems that can be really helpful. Have you ever needed to manipulate arrays in your BML code?
Arrays. Remind me what those are again?
Arrays are basically ordered lists of data. BML has functions for working with them, like append for adding elements, size of array for figuring out how many elements there are, and to sort for arranging them in specific order.
So if I need to manage a list of products, prices, customer data, those functions can help me organize and manipulate that information.
Exactly. There are functions for dates, too, like compare dates. Data fasters get different days, super helpful for calculating time periods, setting expiration dates, even formatting dates in specific ways.
Dates and time calculations, always a fun challenge for programmers.
And that's not all. The other category also has functions for math, manipulating text, error handling, debugging, even working with system settings. It's really a treasure trove.
It's like that miscellaneous drawer in your kitchen where
Oh,
you
yeah.
keep all the handy gadgets and tools.
Let's look at some specific other functions that show how versatile BML can be. One function that can be really helpful in complex CPQ scenarios is calculate configuration.
Okay.
It plays a key role in something called asset-based ordering.
Asset-based ordering. That sounds like a topic for a whole other deep dive.
It is. Asset-based ordering is all about managing products as assets that have a life cycle. They can be configured, installed, upgraded, even retired. It's a way to model those real-world product scenarios right in your CPQ system.
So we're not just selling individual products, we're managing them as assets with a history and a future.
Exactly. Now, calculate configuration figures out the final configuration of an asset based on a bunch of things, like the initial configuration, any upgrades or modifications, and even the projected state of the asset at a certain point in time.
So it's like taking a snapshot of the asset's configuration at any moment, considering everything that's happened and is planned to happen.
Precisely. It's a complex process, but calculate configuration takes care of all the details, making it much easier to manage asset configurations within your BML code.
Okay, so a powerful function for anyone working with asset-based ordering. What other hidden gems are there in the other category?
Let's talk about a simple but essential function, print.
Print. That sounds pretty straightforward. Just display something to the console, right?
You got it. But don't underestimate print. It's incredibly useful for understanding what's going on inside your code, especially when you're debugging or seeing how a function behaves.
So it's like a window into the inner workings of our program.
Exactly. You can use print to see the values of variables, results of calculations, even just messages to help you understand the flow of the code.
Okay, so basic but essential. Any best practices for using print effectively?
Absolutely. One tip is to be strategic. Don't just print everything. That clutters your console and makes it harder to find what you need.
Okay.
Focus on the key things that'll help with your debugging.
Choose those print statements wisely. Focus on the info that's actually helpful.
Got it. Another tip. Use clear and descriptive messages in your print statements. Instead of just printing a variable's value, add some context so you know what you're looking at.
So instead of just 100, print product price 100.
Precisely. When you're debugging something complex, you can even use print statements to trace the execution step by step. Helps you pinpoint exactly where things go wrong.
It's like leaving breadcrumbs along the path of our code, so we can find our way back if we get lost.
Now, let's talk about a function that might seem a little counterintuitive. Thrower.
Thrower. Why would we want to create errors in our code? That sounds a bit dangerous.
It might seem counterproductive, but sometimes triggering an error on purpose is the best thing to do. Imagine you're writing code that validates user input.
Okay.
And you run into a situation where the input is invalid.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the user entered a negative number for a quantity or a date in the past.
Okay, so we found a problem with what the user entered. What do we do?
Sometimes you can handle the error gracefully within your code, maybe provide a default value or ask the user to correct it.
Right.
But sometimes the error is so serious or unexpected that you need to stop everything and alert the user or the system admin.
So it's like hitting the emergency stop button on a machine when something goes wrong.
Exactly. That's where thrower comes in. It lets you stop the execution of your BML code and display a specific error message, telling everyone what went wrong and maybe giving some hints on how to fix it.
It's like raising a red flag and saying,
Fine.
hold on, we need to fix this before we can continue.
Precisely. Thrower is powerful for ensuring data integrity and preventing those garbage in, garbage out situations.
Okay, so it's a way to enforce the rules and keep our data clean. Any best practices for using thrower?
Definitely. Use it wisely. Don't overuse it for every little issue. Save it for when you really need to stop the process and get someone's attention.
So it's not a tool to be used lightly. Be selective about when to hit that emergency stop button.
Exactly. And when you do use it, make sure your error messages are clear, concise, and informative. Explain what went wrong, why it's a problem, and how to fix it.
It's like writing a good bug report. Enough information for someone to understand and fix the issue quickly.
Now, before we leave the other functions, I want to mention one that's super helpful for working with lots of text. String builder.
String builder. That sounds like it has something to do with those text-based variables we talked about.
It does. String builder gives you a better way to create and work with large strings, especially when you're dealing with lots of text or doing things repeatedly within loops.
So instead of building a string bit by bit, we use string builder to create a container for all those fragments.
Exactly. You can then add, insert, and modify those pieces within the string builder object without the performance hit of regular string concatenation.
It's like having a virtual whiteboard to write down bits of text, rearrange them, and then combine them into a final string.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And String Builder has specific functions for working with these objects, making it easy to manipulate and manage those fragments.
Okay, so it's a specialized tool for those text-heavy scenarios. Now, we've covered a lot of functions, but I have one more question. We've talked about functions, variables, libraries, and all these tools, but where does all this BML code actually live? How do we create and manage these functions in Oracle CPQ?
That's a great question. And it takes us to the heart of BML development, the function editor.
The function editor.
Yeah.
Sounds like where the magic happens.
It is. It's a dedicated environment within Oracle CPQ where you can write, test, and manage your BML functions. It's like a coding playground where you can experiment, refine, and really leverage the power of BML.
So it's a mini IDE specifically for BML.
Exactly. The function editor has features to help you write better BML code, syntax highlighting, code completion, error checking, and even a built-in debugger to help you find those pesky bugs.
Ah, a debugger. Essential for every programmer.
Absolutely. The debugger in the function editor lets you step through your code line by line, see the values of variables, and find the exact point where something goes wrong. It's super valuable for understanding how your code works and fixing those tricky issues.
Okay, so the function editor is our BML command center. It's where we bring all those functions, variables, and libraries together to customize our CPQ system.
Exactly. And it's always evolving, too, with new features and improvements.
Well, that's great to make BML development even more powerful.
Now, let's talk about one more function that really shows how dynamic BML can be.
Yeah.
Set attribute value.
Set attribute value. I'm guessing we're going to be changing something with this one.
You got it.
Yeah.
Set attribute value lets you modify attribute values on either the main document
Hmm.
or a subdocument within a transaction.
Wait, so we can change the values of attributes while the code is running?
That's right. It's like having the ability to rewrite the info on a product spec sheet
Yeah.
or a customer's order form directly from your code.
That's incredibly powerful, but also potentially dangerous. We don't want to accidentally mess up important data.
That's a valid point. You need to use set attribute value carefully and understand what you're doing.
Right.
But when you use it right, it can automate processes, enforce business rules, even adapt to changing conditions.
Can you give me an example of how attribute value might be used?
Sure. Imagine a business rule that says orders over a certain amount get free shipping.
Okay.
You could write some BML code that checks the order total, and if it's over that limit, it uses set attribute value to change the shipping cost to 0.
So we're automatically applying that free shipping discount. That's cool.
Exactly. Set attribute value can also be used for setting default values for attributes, updating values based on calculations or external data, even enforcing data validation rules.
Okay, so lots of control over our data. Are there any best practices for using set attribute value? Things to watch out for.
Absolutely. One thing to keep in mind is that set attribute value can only change certain types of attributes, those that are marked modifiable in the CPQ system.
So it's not a free pass to change anything.
Right.
We need to play by the rules.
Precisely. And as I mentioned before, use attribute value with caution and understand how it might affect your data. Always test thoroughly and have backups just in case.
Okay, use it wisely. Respect the data. I think we've covered a wide range of BML functions in this part of the deep dive.
We've seen how BML can automate tasks, manipulate data, generate documents, talk to external systems, even change attribute values on the fly.
Quite the journey through the BML world.
It is.
But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the broader implications of using BML in a CPQ environment. What are the main benefits and challenges companies might face?
Great question. One of the biggest benefits is the ability to customize your CPQ system to fit your specific needs and processes.
So it's about making the CPQ work for you, not the other way around.
Exactly. BML lets you automate repetitive tasks, enforce those complex business rules, streamline your processes, ultimately making your sales team more efficient and your customers happier.
Sounds like a win-win. But I'm sure there are some challenges too.
Oh, definitely. One is that BML requires specialized knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a programming language, so you'll need developers who know the syntax and how to use it properly.
So companies need to invest in the right people and training
Absolutely.
to make sure they can develop and maintain their BML code effectively.
And as your CPQ system grows, BML code can get really complex.
Right. As you add more and more, things can get a bit messy.
Exactly. That's where those coding best practices we talked about become so important. Writing clean code, using good variable names, testing thoroughly before going live.
So just like with any software, good planning, documentation, and testing are key.
And lastly, BML is only one part of your CPQ system.
Right. It's powerful, but it needs to work with all the other parts.
Yeah.
Your product catalog, pricing rules, workflow processes.
Exactly. BML is most effective when it's part of a bigger picture for CPQ implementation and customization.
So it's not a magic bullet, but a powerful tool that can really boost your CPQ system when used correctly.
Precisely. And with that, I think we're ready to wrap up our deep dive and move on to our final thoughts. Well, here we are,
Here we are.
the final stage of our BML deep dive.
It's been quite a journey, from those basic building blocks to some pretty powerful functions.
It really has. We explored those core concepts like functions, variables, and data types, and we saw how BML handles them in its own way.
And we didn't shy away from the tougher stuff, like debugging, especially those scenarios with util functions and those little pitfalls that can trip anyone up.
Right, but we also got into some of the more advanced aspects like package lifecycle management
Yeah.
for moving functionality between environments and namespaces to keep everything organized and prevent conflicts.
And of course, BMQL, that powerful query language that lets us work with those CPQ data tables directly from our code.
It's like having that secret backdoor to all that valuable data.
Right.
But as we said, it's a door you got to use carefully. Understand the potential impact.
Absolutely. You know, what really stands out to me is how BML, even with its complexities, really empowers businesses to take control of their CPQ systems. It's not just about writing code. It's about turning business needs into real solutions.
I couldn't agree more. It's about bridging that gap between the technical details and the tangible results that BML can deliver.
So for our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some ideas and a solid foundation for your own BML journey. What questions has this sparked for you? What parts of BML are you excited to explore further?
BML might seem a bit intimidating at first, but as you dig in, you'll uncover its power and flexibility. It's all about connecting the dots to create solutions that make a real difference.
And that's what we love about these deep dives, helping you uncover those hidden gems and taking your understanding to the next level.
So keep those sources coming.
Yes.
We're always ready for a new topic and to help you navigate this ever-changing world of information. Until next time.
See you then.